Hello,
everyone.
Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Eva Bakum, and I am the Director of Industry Insight and Engagement for Canarian Gaming. This is an IGB webinar, but organized in partnership with ICE 365. And part of the ICE 365 Try by Gaming series, a series of live but mostly on-demand content pieces on Try by Gaming that will be launching next week on the 19th of April. With a whole variety of content pieces, all really focused on exploring tribal history in tribal gaming. You'll be able to find tribal report, viewpoints, and personal opinion pieces on tribal gaming, digital speakeasies, which actually some of them kicking off tomorrow as well, webinar, live webinars and webinar recordings, like the recording of today's webinar, and lots of on-demand video content, including series of interviews with early adopters of digital strategies from Foxwoods, Pala Interactive, Wind Creek Casino, Mississippi Choctaw Tribe, Mohegan Sun, Grayton Rancheria, Naiga, and a lot more. And also lots of editorial content and practical information, including data on tribal regulation, expansion, size of the market, and future opportunities. So please do check the website that you would have seen on your screens. Come back next week as we will be releasing lots of content and video pieces. We are also doing a survey with tribal casinos on the state of post-COVID recovery, and I will share the link to that survey with you right after my introduction. We would love to include your views as well. The survey isn't too long, but I suggest that you do fill it out perhaps after the webinar, so you really don't miss out on any of the knowledge that will be shared today by our amazing panelists. And that really leads me to the introduction of our moderator and my dear friend for over 10 years. Also actually my mentor, in particular when it comes to all things tribal, Victor Rocha. Victor has been bringing education on tribal gaming for years now to our show ICE in London. And I would say that ICE 365 Tribal Gaming content series that I have just talked to you about is really kind of a digital continuation of what we couldn't deliver this year at the live show in London at ICE. Victor is obviously well known in Indian country, doesn't really need an introduction. He is the initiator and owner of Pachanga.net, a website that I think all of you should be visiting daily, and also sign up for Pachanga.net newsletter. It's a great source of news and information on Indian country. He's also the president of Victor Strategies. Victor, over to you. And actually, just a note to our audience: you can post your questions throughout the webinar using the Q&A functionality. We will try to pick out your questions during the webinar, or we'll try to address as many as possible towards the end of the session. Thank you so much. I'm going to take myself off camera right now. Enjoy the session, and Victor, over to you.
Thank you, Eva. Thank you very much. And thank you for that wonderful introduction. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, wherever you are. If you're in the United States, West Coast, East Coast, and especially to our friends in Europe, we'd like to thank you for joining our webinar today. As Eva said, normally we would get an opportunity to have this conversation when we're in London, but because of the pandemic, we weren't able to go to London. So this is a great opportunity to not only have this conversation, but to memorialize it in ICE's new ICE 360 program too, which I think is going to be very important for the industry, because it's going to be a database of information, and then we won't have to have this conversation over again and again and again. Isn't that correct, my panelists? So first of all, again, thank you everyone. On this is a really unique session, I think, because this is an opportunity for us to do a recap after over a year into this pandemic, and we're starting to get to the point where the industry is opening up, and there's still a lot of questions, and all of us are in different stages of opening. Rodney's a lot further than we are, Matt in Oklahoma, and James and Erica here in California. And by the way, I apologize if I'm using first names and familiarity. Again, Chairman Butler, Chairman Pinto, Chairman Morgan, and Vice Chair James Siva too. So I apologize for familiarity. So let's just jump right into this thing. Chairman Butler, let's start with you since I see you first. How has this pandemic's been pretty wild. Obviously, we were shut down for about 2 to 3 months, depending on where you are. I think my casino was down about 2 months. How has the politics and changed during the politics during the pandemics? What are you seeing?
Well,
States and stuff.
Yeah. Well, first off, Wiki Sukun Temple Wonks, good day, all my friends, and Victor. Appreciate you having me on this panel along with the other distinguished leaders. It's always a pleasure. We were closed at Pequot. We were shut down, obviously, first time in 29 or 28 years at that point, which was unprecedented because of this. But we were closed for about 2.5 months at Mashantucket with Foxwoods, and we worked with Mohegan at the time and with the communicated with the governor that we had intended on reopening on June 1 of last year. And leading up to that, we spent a lot of time in those 2.5 months being closed, focusing on, what were the safety protocols and talking with leaders on this call and around the country about what best practices were and how we could safely reopen. So I think that's a point that I want to highlight, that we've done that successfully, and we've been open now for almost a year. And have had almost 3 million plus people walk through our property and have done that in a safe way that we can all be proud of. But, it's interesting because this all happened during the transition. When you say how is it politically, how we've been affected, but it's all during a transition in a presidential election cycle. And so that was fascinating in itself, where I think at large, we got more interest from the administration or support from the prior administration than we had seen over the prior 4 years, because it was important to them to get reelected. So we were in a unique position to get support. And you saw that in the first CARES Act, where tribes were included in a big way. And now you're seeing that in even greater sense in the American Recovery Plan, where tribes have a carve out of $20 billion to support our economies and support our nations. And so, it was better than it had been throughout the prior administration. There was a lot going on, and we took the ball in our own hands, in our case at Pequot, to manage our way through it. But it certainly, the transition of the administration reshaped the relationship. And I'll give one other example before turning over to the other distinguished panelists. In this administration, in the prior administration, there's very little contact with my nation in the White House, unlike with the Obama administration. And and Biden comes in, President Biden comes in, and he does the greatest thing that anyone could have ever desired, in appointing Deb Haaland as the Secretary of Interior. But since they've been in office, we've had both the First Lady and the Vice President visit Connecticut. And in both of those instances, and this just is a reflection of the administration and how they look at Indian country as sovereign peers, in both of those instances, the White House reached out and said, hey, Chairman Butler, and they also reached out to Mohegan, we're going to be in your territory out of respect for the relationship, and as direct sovereigns, we'd like to invite you to spend time with the First Lady and with the Vice President of the United States. And that would never happen under the prior administration. And so it just tells you that the progress that we're continuing to make in the transition between administrations.
Well, and to give this a little context to our viewers, what Chairman Butler's talking about is in Connecticut, they were looking at doing an expansion, and then all of a sudden they had an administration that was very adversarial. As a matter of fact, you're in, when all the lobbyists for MGM and the rest of them were lobbying against the tribe, they were getting direct access to the Secretary of Interior, and we were hitting a wall. And so when the administration changed, it was a new day. And so the fact that we're seeing this type of openness is very important. Chairwoman Pinto, good morning. How's that cigarette?
Good morning. It's my pen top. Thank you very much. I'm happy to be with all of you.
That's a great sign of dominance. You can smoke.
Well, it would actually be a cigar, and it wouldn't be a cigarette. But yeah. Good morning,
there you go. Yeah, listen, cigars are great. I think, unless you're standing in a cigar bar and you don't smoke. As Chairman Butler said, our relationships with the governments are very important. They're one of the defining issues that we have in our administration and in our tribes, and actually in our lifetime. And speaking in our lifetimes, we've seen a change a mentality about tribal gaming. You know, when tribal gaming started 30 years ago, it was this big boogeyman, the tribes are going to come back and blah, blah, blah. And, you know, you're kind of still dealing with this. There was an issue here in San Diego recently where, you know, for like 20 years, you had these supervisors and that were standing in the way of your tribe's progress. Can you give us a little bit of information about that and how that's changing and what are you seeing in California?
Absolutely, yes. And please call me Erica. Good morning and good to see the rest of the distinguished tribal leaders here. You're talking about a policy and I'm from San Diego. My tribe is 20 miles east of downtown San Diego. And San Diego has about 18 plus tribal nations. And the county has this longstanding policy. It's been on their, it's been their policy since, I want to say 1994, when I was just a child. And so, you know, this policy opposes all land into trust, all land into trust. So a tribe like me who has 6 acres, you know, and it's all taken up by my economic development, but I'm unable to expand, you know, without county support. I need the support of the congressman here, and it hasn't been good, you know, to deal with these county board of supervisors. But now the tide has changed, and we've seen a shift in new supervisors, you know, Chair Fletcher, who's a great guy, and many others who have been elected and have changed the tide. And now what's happening is this county board of supervisors wants to not only reverse and take away this policy, but they want to add a tribal liaison. And I think that's excellent because, like I said, we have 18 plus tribal nations, more than any other county in the United States. And so it's good practice to deal with the people who have been here, you know, since time immemorial. And I think that's excellent. Unfortunately, the vote that was to take place last Wednesday, a week ago, has since been delayed, but I have been assured that it will take place. And it's, you know, as Chairman Mazzetti, my good friend, he says, just outright, this is a racist policy. And that's some term he does not use lightly, but it is, because it's prohibited us from expanding. Now I understand that other tribes want to buy land. It's not just me with the 6 acres, it's other tribes who have, you know, because I thought everybody's set in their land, but really we're not. I mean, this has been our land since, you know, it was stolen from us. But I think this will be a good policy. This is a good direction that the County Board of Supervisors is heading, and it's going to set us up for a good collaboration. And I just look forward to that.
You know, and first of all, Chairwoman Pinto, you know, it's long overdue. It's long overdue. As somebody who has watched this for a long time, and especially your tribe and how long it took to get to where you are. But if people are hearing what you're saying, you're talking about 6 acres for a tribal nation. This is a tribal nation that had much more than that. And you know, their ancestral lands bump into other tribes, but they had the freedom to grow, freedom to raise their children. And so they have 6 acres, and they have a community that has, and of supervisors and other political that have kept them on this land and have tried everything they can to oppose their economic expansion and the sovereignty. And so, to me, you know, this is a really classic example of, you know, states infringing on the rights of tribes to be nations. You know what I mean? And that's the whole thing. If they keep you on 6 acres, then they can compartmentalize you and dismiss you almost. But because of gaming has given us the opportunity. You know what I mean? Gaming has like I've said, if you know, anyone who's followed me know, gaming is a means to an end. That end is cultural preservation. You can only preserve your cultures if you have land, if you have your elders, and if you have your culture. I mean, it's just really simple. You know, I apologize, Matt. Kind of, you know, we're talking about states' rights, you know, and I think that's a very important thing. And you know, for our European listeners, you know, one of the things to understand is you understand the structure of the politics of the United States. And what you do is you have the federal government up here, and you have the states and the tribes under this federal umbrella. And the tribes and the states are kind of like, the states are here, and they try to treat the tribes like here, when technically we're supposed to be able. And that's always been our fight. Matt, in that question, that, you know, in Oklahoma, you guys have had a change of administration. You have a governor that initially he was being sold. He was a tribal member from the Cherokee Nation. And then all of a sudden you have a governor that's very adversarial to expansion and growth. How does that affect you, and how does that change your strategy?
First thing, thank you, Victor. Appreciate you inviting us. Appreciate my fellow panelists, and thank you for the question. So, I think you're correct. If you look at the United States Constitution, tribes are political entities. That is what we're dealing with. And so many times when we having conversations with the broader community, they try to peg us into more of an ethnicity, forgetting that pre-constitutional origins that we had and were included in the formation of the United States. So when we start talking to our state leaders, that's something that we have to continually remind them. Even here in Oklahoma, as you pointed out, our current governor is a tribal citizen, somebody that looks at things not in terms of partnerships, which I know our tribal leaders here in Oklahoma, we have 38, federally recognized tribes that most of us were removed here at some point, Oklahoma being the former Indian territory of the United States, where they sent Indians, to remove us from their expansions. And that all has a historical context as we're living and breathing and still thriving today. It's unfortunate that we have to continually deal with these issues, but as tribal leaders, that's something that we sign up for when we enter and hold our positions, and trying to make sure that sovereignty doesn't only mean the rights that we preserved that are still recognized. Sovereignty also means the right for us to make our own choices. And how does that interplay with being what we would like to say be as a partner with the state of Oklahoma, with our local communities, because we're all intertwined here in Oklahoma over the last 115 years that we've coexisted together. And it's not if you lose a portion of your pie somehow that I gain it, or if I lose a portion you gain it. Our citizens, both tribal and non-tribal, want to see the state uplifted, and trying to keep it in terms of partnerships, things that we can do together in order to improve the individual lives is hard when you have someone holding that position that doesn't have that same view. So it affects, it started in our case, with gaming compacts and whether those were going to be extended. And we had different views on that. We had to go to court, unfortunately, to get that settled. But now you see it drift over into other areas: environmental protections, roads and infrastructure, economic development. It continually is this message that says, hey, if tribes are doing better, Oklahoma's doing worse, and that's just not the case. And I think that message is clear in our individual communities. They see the benefits of having tribes in their communities, having worked with us for such a long time, and we work hand in hand. But unfortunately, that message is not coming through, which makes it difficult. But we've survived other governments. We survived other governors here in the state. We'll continue to work on that partnership and that relationship. People here, that they continually tell me, our tribal citizens are not looking at whether there's an R, a Republican, or a Democrat in office. They're looking to improve their lives, and it's our job to try to work with those governments in order to improve their lives.
Chairman Morgan, absolutely right. And I think our readers, or excuse me, our listeners should know that, our viewers, when the governor from Oklahoma came in, he really got elected on, I'm going to work with everyone. And then he just came in, and it felt like they had a white paper somewhere that said, this is how we're going to get those tribes and diminish their sovereignty. We're going to go after their compacts, go out of their compacts out of state. We're going to make them pay more money. Then all of a sudden, you guys become the boogeyman, and they become the big hero. But it didn't really work out this way. I think what Governor Stitt was the fact that the Attorney General was with you guys and said, this is legal. We've had these great relationships, and you have this guy come in and just try to ruin everything that you guys have built in the last 20 years. But I think the example here is that the tribes are strong. They're not backing down. They're doing it the right way, and doing it the first time. And so I think it's very important, as we watch Oklahoma and the rest of us that are very much involved, there's a lot of lessons there to watch. And I think you guys have done a great job. I think the whole thing, and I don't want to go too much in the weed with McGirt, but I think obviously that has a little bit to do with it. But I think what we're looking at right here is that as this relationship, evolves, eventually, we're dealing with sports data, we're dealing with gamut expansion, and it's all related. How our relationships with the governors and the administrations, they're all intertwined, and eventually, we're going to have to come down and sit at the table. So that's why it's good to have good working relationships, but not necessarily, if we don't, like Chairman Butler, in a way, Chairman Butler, his relationship with the governor in Oklahoma is still the same, is kind of the same, a little different, but you could be nice with one hand, and then on the other hand, they're carrying a stick, so you have to be careful and how you deal with them and stuff like that. Chairman Siva, welcome. I apologize that you're the last, but and I think in California it's a little different. In California, we have a governor that is more welcoming of the tribes. We have a legislature that can be friendly and then can be adversarial, but mostly, we have a state surrounded by a state of friends. So welcome. First of all, welcome a little bit. And by the way, I forgot to introduce everyone too. So hopefully we just jumped into this thing as usual. I apologize. That's my fault. Chairman Siva, can you, how is the relationship right now with the tribes in California? It's really evolved in the last 25 years too, hasn't it?
Yes, and thank you for that, and thank you for having me on this panel with all these distinguished leaders. I really appreciate it. Yeah, I think looking at California and the relationship between the kind of elected leaders of the state and the tribal communities is kind of almost not the quite opposite of Oklahoma, but it's very different. But at the same time, we still do have our issues. When the pandemic hit and all the tribes voluntarily closed, we did so at the behest of ourselves and for the benefit of our community members and try to protect everyone's safety. The state had reached out and had expressed concerns about our industry, but they didn't overstep. They didn't try to say, you guys need to shut down. It was totally left up to us. And there's been some big steps in the last few years. I believe it was 2019 when Governor Newsom did a public apology for the tribal genocide that took place here in California. And that acknowledgement was a big moment for the top elected official in the state to publicly acknowledge the history of the state, the terrible situation that existed and that we're building off of now in the present day, was a very pivotal moment. But at the same time, we've had issues that have come up in the last year during the pandemic that has been really hard to get any kind of movement with the governor. We've had various tribes have compact issues with the state, kind of different directives coming through his office that have really tried to limit sovereignty or kind of chip away at it. And trying to get some positive movement there has been a bit difficult. So I'm hopeful to see some action behind his words and not just kind words, and actually see him put his belief in tribal sovereignty into action and fulfill those words that he spoke a couple years ago.
Yeah, that as obviously James, Erica, and I are both California Native Americans. So the history of the California Native American, not unlike the history of Connecticut and Oklahoma, we are defined by these things, and they're very important, and we carry them with us. So, we haven't forgot, our ancestors haven't forgot. So, but our relationships have evolved. James, one of the interesting things is back in around this time last year, they introduced some legislation for sports betting, and it was really interesting. They had this legislation. It was brought together by lobbyists, and it was like, everyone was brought together in this wonderful deal. Oh, by the way, let's bring the Indians in now. And it was just very insulting and very ridiculous to put this thing out without consulting the tribes. And it died an ignoble death. As a matter of fact, it died the day after our webcast, which is really nice, back in June. But but around that time, the tribes decided they were going to go for an initiative. So instead of dealing with sometimes adversarial legislature, they've decided to go to an initiative to get sports betting in California. Can you tell us a little about this and what's the latest news on this initiative?
Yeah, and I think the decision for tribes to go back to the people of California, I think it speaks to our belief that the people of California overall support tribes and support tribal gaming. Going back to the earlier propositions of Prop 1, Prop 5A, those spoke to the people of California's support for us as tribal communities and us trying to uplift ourselves out of poverty and secure futures for our generations moving forward. And so that was the same decision. Instead of relying on a legislation that can be, as you pointed out, not always in favor of tribes. So instead of trying to take the decision out of their hands and give it back to the relationship between tribes and the people of California, that was the kind of onus behind the sports betting initiative that tribes put forward. And the timing of the bill that came out of the legislation, I think, was just terrible. I mean, we're in the middle of a pandemic. Tribes are just reopening. Some tribes hadn't even reopened at that point in June, and yet you're going to take the time and seize the opportunity when tribes are at their weakest point that they've been in the last 20 years to try to chip away at our sovereignty even more. I think it was appalling, the timing of it. The fact that they didn't consult tribes at all is just egregious. And so I think the foresight in the tribes that moved that initiative forward ahead of that, I think really shone through then, because if we hadn't had something moving forward, it would have been a much more difficult fight to get that bill, to kill that bill essentially.
Right. And yeah, go ahead, sir. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, presently the initiative has acquired the number of signatures needed to qualify for the next ballot. And so they are going through the signature verification process, and that should happen very, very soon. And so timing just depends on kind of the next official ballot that comes out of the state.
Right. And, there's another issue here that's been written about recently is that, while this was going on, while we were gathering signatures to put this referendum on, there was also a push to remove the governor, to impeach the governor, which happened after we legalized gaming in the early 2000s with Gray Davis and Arnold Schwarzenegger. So they're trying that move again. But what it does is change the dynamic. Now, what the tribes did is they did this initiative, and the idea was they were going to put an initiative on the ballot in 2022 to change the state constitution to legalize sports betting and give the tribes exclusivity like they do in class 3 gaming. Tell us how's that's going. What am I hearing?
Yeah, and it's on the verge of being. It got the number of signatures required, and now they're being verified. They've there's different methods that they use to verify the signatures. They do a sample method, and then they do a full verification. It has gone through the sample method, and that has shown that the signatures they're all good. They're all quality signatures. There's no fraudulent signatures contained in them, but they have to go through and do the full verification still. But there seems to be nothing holding that back, just timing to actually go through the kind of laborious process. And then it just depends on timing. Kind of, you mentioned the recall with Governor Newsom. It just depends on when the next ballot comes out. If that ballot happens in 2021 with recall, if that ballot happens in 2022 as scheduled, the timing is going to be kind of left up to the state, because the legislation will dictate what when that next ballot comes out for the recall. So
right,
we're kind of just waiting and watching now and seeing what happens. And
so, and what Chairman Siva is saying is that there's a possibility it could be on this November. So we're still waiting, even though we went for 2022. So that's going to be a real game changer. We're going to be talking about sports betting in California. It's going to be on the ballot. And by the way, this is an unprecedented. This is what happened in the late 90s when we had a governor that was adversarial. He wouldn't give us a compact. He threw us out of the room. They negotiated with the tribe that didn't have a compact, and they said, okay, now you guys are going to sign this. And that's exactly what the tribes did. They got the signatures, they put it on the ballot, went to the people of California and said, trust us, and the people did. And that's how the tribes got exclusivity for sports betting. Hold on, I have a question here. So, that's really big news, and it's really exciting, especially about sports betting in California. Again, it's still not locked in, so we still have to wait to find out. But there's a probability, and it looks like there's a good chance that it could be on the ballot in November, but still it's not confirmed and it's not a sure thing yet, but we all have our eyes on that. So, Chairman Butler, one of our questions is we're talking about tribal sovereignty becoming corroded as states are expanding gambling. You guys just are in the middle of a deal right now. How was your relationships with the governor and the states changed over the last 20 years, or even in your term?
Well, it was fascinating listening to Chairman Siva and what you guys are going through in California, given what we've just been through in Connecticut. And we're not done, right? You never cross the finish line until you're there. The relationship's been interesting. We've gone up and down over the years. I mean, we got into this out of putting the governor, 29 years ago, we got into this out of my former council and leadership with the foresight and the strength to put the existing governor at that time under significant duress, which led to our procedures, which to this day have never been fully agreed to by the state of Connecticut. They were, per IGRA, they were forced upon the state. And so that kind of is the foundation of our relationship here in Connecticut, and it's had its ups and downs. And it's interesting that where we've now landed with internet gaming and with sports betting, this is a conversation that most wouldn't even know that has gone back for almost 10 years on internet gaming, and the last 5 with sports betting. So 3 different administrations here in Connecticut, and every single time it starts with an educational process with the new governor to understand, 1, what sovereignty is, 2, the importance of our tribal economies to the state's economy, and 3, the rights that we have given our exclusive agreements throughout the state. And so as we got to a comfortable place with the last governor, Governor Malloy, we had expanded Keno. We were talking about sports betting. We actually had sports betting legislation up about 3 years ago before he had left office. Starting with the new administration, it reset, right? We had already had the approval for the 3rd casino in the state of Connecticut. The new governor comes on and is immediately trying to blow that up. and not appreciating the relationship with the tribes, with the state over the last 3 decades, and so it was a learning process, and we had to walk through what exclusivity meant, what tribal sovereignty meant, and what the history of the tribes were in the state and our contributions. And so after 2 years or so, we got there to the point at which we were no longer talking about third-party commercial operators coming into the state. And it really came to a head, quite frankly, from the pandemic, I would say, forcing everyone to think differently and more creatively about how we protect the gaming economy in Connecticut and moving it online and what that would take. And the understanding at this point that the tribes do have the exclusivity in the state. There was some debate around sports betting, and as you're seeing this playing out across the country, and I find that fascinating, especially the law that I guess was either signed or just passed in Arizona, which is this mixture of tribes and commercial entities and sports brands, and it's this bundle of stuff, right? And then you look at New York, where the New York legislation looks like it's going to potentially be 2 operators, and it doesn't speak to tribes. And so, we got to the point in Connecticut where they fully recognized the inherent right of both us and Mohegan in the state when it relates to gaming, and we're able to work out a deal that now will expand into iGaming, which from our perspective was the prize. And sports betting, we're also allowing the state to go online with iLottery, and as well as iKeno, which from a prior negotiation, we actually received 25%. It's the inverse of our slot contribution, where for allowing the state to do Keno, we actually received 25% of the state's Keno revenues divvied up between the 2 tribes. So it was a long road to get here, and tense at times, to the point where the deal probably fell apart a dozen times, and even recently, about a month ago, we felt like it wasn't going to happen. And so cooler heads prevailed, as I say, and we came back to the table. We have a deal that, look, it's not the perfect deal for everyone, but it's enough where it moves us forward. It protects our tribal economy for the next decade in the way that it's structured. And now we're moving forward with legislation. So the legislative process in Connecticut goes until June. They've just started drafting the legislation. I've actually seen it for the first time about a week ago, and as all the other tribal leaders can relate, the legislation doesn't always align with your conversation. And so now we're going through that dance again of making sure that the legislation appropriately reflects what we negotiated that protects both our nation and the Mohegan Nation. So But it is fascinating when you look at the other states and how they're treating tribes, and some are including tribes and some aren't. And just it truly is, when from a broader perspective, this perception that sports betting isn't gaming when it suits that state that's making the argument is certainly detrimental to sovereignty, and impacts those nations that are within those states that are taking that approach. And Connecticut started there, and it took years to educate them otherwise. And quite honestly, the threat of what they would lose. And in Connecticut, the state's benefited almost by the tune of $8 billion from the gaming proceeds that have gone back to the state. So that's a pretty heavy stick that we're holding to the state to say, look, you're putting that at risk because of your loose interpretation of sports betting and exclusivity.
Yeah, and one of the things that jumps out there is that the fact that, you guys were able to negotiate and adapt, but you said you get 25% of the Keno, which allows for expansion, allows for the state, and yet you guys are still involved. And I think that was really smart. And I think a lot of tribes can learn from that strategy. Chairman Morgan, again, good afternoon. With Chairman Butler, it was interesting. So he had a guy that didn't know anything about sovereignty, comes in and tries to change everything. Your governor was a little different. He had a little more background, and yet he still was going to be adversarial. How is this going to be going forward with sports betting? How do you guys navigate these rocky shoals?
Yeah, no, I think that, as I think the other tribal leaders would tell you on the phone or on this webinar, that, every relationship ebbs and flows. And in Oklahoma, we've not been in a hurry to get things done. The Indian Gaming Regulatory Act, passed in 1988 as a federal statute, really classifying how to do Indian gaming and setting up the compact process. Oklahoma tribal leaders wanted to pursue that immediately. We actually did not sign our first gaming compacts outside of horse racing, of course, until 2004. We were patient. We developed our Class 2 product into something that was profitable and allowed tribes to grow and provide those necessary resources back towards its programs and services, until that we could arrive at an agreement that we felt like properly recognized everyone's benefit and worked for everyone. Sports betting, I think, will probably take a similar path. We see everything that's going on across the country, are interested in participating in that sports betting here in Oklahoma, but we're not going to do it to the detriment of tribes. It has to make sense for what we're doing, and I think there needs to be, as Chairman Butler has so well stated it, the state governments have to realize that benefit they're receiving from tribes, not only gaming benefits, but just employment and tribes being in the state and all the positives that it brings. And so it's not going to be a quick conversation, I think, for us, as long as Governor Stitt holds that chair, and he has the ability to dictate the state's policy on what that looks like, unless and until a proper deal is put on the table. And that's the way Oklahoma works. We have one model compact that fits everyone, and the state makes an offer, and tribes get to decide whether they like that offer or not. Of course, we're going to have ongoing conversations that try to influence what that offer looks like, but unless they can provide something that provides us value, we'll stick with the deal we have. We're continuing to deal with the ongoing pandemic issues. We're continuing to operate our other economic development. We're continuing to operate all of our programs and services. So tribal leaders have expressed to me they're not in a hurry to get this deal done. It's more important that it's the right deal.
Right, and Chairman, you bring up a very valid point, which is our relationship with time, I think, is a lot different than the dominant culture. We, like I always say, not only do we think about 7 generations ahead, but we carry the grudges of 7 generations behind us. I know who my grandma was angry with, and I'm sure you guys all do too. I think that's a very native thing. So, one of the big things everyone is talking about in gaming, and where everyone is really sinking their teeth in, is mobile. Now, before we dig into this, I think I need to give a little context for some of our viewers who are unaware of tribal sovereignty or tribal gaming. But you know, with when tribal gaming started to get its legs underneath it, the government had this legislation called the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act that they passed in around 1988, I believe, maybe 89. And what that did is basically tried to keep the tribes on the reservation. But what it says is that you can't take a bet off the reservation. And as technology has expanded and grown, we're starting to see, you know, especially with mobile and stuff, that's the big rub, is that the tribes can have mobile. Chairman Butler, in your deal, and before, and by the way, Chairman Siva and Chairwoman Pinto, this is actually going to be coming right back to you guys too. So, but Chairman Butler, how big a deal was that for you guys to get mobile?
Well, just before I answer that one, Victor, you know, what Chairman Morgan just pointed out about the perspective and the different perspective that we have versus what states have, that actually allowed us to get the deal that was right for Pequot and for Mohegan. You know, we were patient. We went 10 years on iGaming, 5 years on sports betting, and we made it very, very clear that from the state's perspective, we didn't need this deal. We could work within our current agreements and be successful in our tribal communities with last as they have for millennium. But we're willing to do a deal that makes sense for everyone if and only it makes sense. But tying that back to mobile, so we actually launched a mobile platform probably 6 or 7 years ago, which was important for a couple of reasons. Again, as I noted earlier, we've been talking about iGaming for 10 plus years, and we felt like getting into mobile social on gaming was a first step to get there and get our feet wet and understand the mechanisms of it and the infrastructure, how it works. And so that, interestingly, actually turned out to be a nice test that's generated significant revenue for us. And you know, from a mobile social platform, those that aren't familiar with it, I mean, social gaming is simply going online and purchasing virtual credits. It's kind of like Bitcoin before Bitcoin existed, right? You know, there's some perceived value, but it's really the entertainment factor and people are paying up for it. And so social did that for us. And then we were able to transition that into a true marketing tool where people were playing online social, spending, you know, a couple $1,000s online for the entertainment factor. And we coupled that with our land-based facility and drove patrons back to Foxwoods that could come and have a great meal and stay overnight and then see a show they couldn't get from the social aspect. And so, but that gave us our foundation into what we're now transitioning to with online gaming. And that we truly believe that's a game changer with mobile gaming. And in fact, when we started this, it was before mobile was really big, and we were thinking everyone's going to be playing on their desktop. So think about that, right? But now everyone's on their mobile phones. When you look at the statistics out of New Jersey and Pennsylvania and now Michigan, I mean, it's 80% of it's on the mobile platform. And so the sooner that you adapt that, you know, from a tribal nation perspective, the better off it'll be, because that's where the economy is going. It's all going mobile, and preparing for that and having the appropriate platforms in place and the partners that can get you there sooner rather than later is critically important.
Chairman Butler, you're absolutely right. You know, I mean, everyone is buying into mobile. You know, in California, and Chairman Siva and Chairwoman Pinto can speak to this issue. Excuse me. That it's the initiative in California is land-based retail only. So, Chairwoman Pinto, what does this mean for California? Are we eventually going to get mobile, or it's just going to be retail at first? Well, how do you see this evolving?
Well, you know, I do see this evolving first in our casinos and then eventually going mobile. And that's, you know, for us at Hamul, we're just a 5-year-old property. We're a baby of the bunch, you know, and we haven't really been we've been keeping our fingers on the pulse, but really what we're focused on at Hamul, and I would defer to Chairman Siva for this stuff because he's the expert on this, but we're trying to just maintain, you know, our economic development that took us 20 years to finally utilize, you know, from our 1999 compact and then getting a new compact that goes out 20 years. But I do see this becoming mobile, which kind of worries me a little bit, because does that mean that gaming in general is going to be open up to the whole entire state of California? And does this, you know, impact a lot of the other tribes, you know, that maybe don't have the best locations of casinos, because, you know, we're all pushed somewhere or another far from the metropolitan cities. But I do see it going that direction, first within the casinos and then mobile. But I would defer to Chairman Siva on all this stuff.
And Chairman Siva, you know, she's talking about a model that's already established, you know, doing retail and then moving into mobile. How do you see this evolving?
Yeah, I do think there's a great need to establish it in just brick and mortar casinos in California, because of the kind of the market that's here and the fact that there's a large number of tribes, and there's also a large amount of diversity between those tribes, both larger kind of economic based tribes, larger land based tribes, smaller tribes, more rural tribes, more urban tribes. So to move into the online mobile space immediately, I think would be, it could have a kind of a disadvantage for a lot of those tribes that maybe don't have the ability to be able to find a partner, as Chairman Butler pointed out, to be able to get you to that space. So I think being able to establish it as a brick and mortar activity, as something exclusive to tribal casinos initially, and then realizing that keeping it offline isn't going to be a reality forever, but having some kind of ramp up program, whether that's a 5-year program, 10-year program, what have you, but having the initial phase established in brick and mortar only, I think will help those tribes and all tribes in California to figure out the best means for them to engage in this new form of gaming, and also give them time to find the best partners to fit their particular situation. I mean, coming from Morongo, we've been looking at kind of mobile gaming and online gaming for a while. Like Morongo is behind the iPoker push for the last decade, and we've kind of put that to the wayside for now. But I do think looking at the state overall and looking at tribes overall, I do think the best move forward for tribes in California is to stick to brick and mortar for the time being.
Right. Well, you know, it brings up an interesting situation, because, you know, mobile is what the rest of the industry is sinking their teeth in, and as a matter of fact, it's what they're all promising for their growth and their business. And so, you know, you look at Tennessee, where they have mobile and they have sports betting, yet they don't have any retail on the ground yet. You know what I mean? So I think that's a really interesting thing. And you know, and I think what people need to understand is that the tribes aren't being sticks in the mud. What they're doing is they're protecting their sovereignty every step of the way. Especially in California, the tribes have exclusivity for gaming, and they have no intent of giving that up. And as Chairman Siva said, and Chairman Butler said, you know, we can wait. You know, and you know, if anything, with the iPoker incident, I should say, we learned, you know, if we become adversarial with each other, nobody wins at it. And then, you know, we can wait. But it's also a very important lesson for the rest of the industry that's saying, you know what, we can sit out and wait it out. Can you? You know, and so I think it's going to force everyone to stay in line, to keep their sense, and let the tribes are at the steering wheel. The tribes are driving this bus, so let them do it. If you want to get in, we're going to push you in front of the bus and ride right over you. So it's very important that you know, the tribes are leading this thing. They are the ones who put the money up for it to get the referendum on the ballot. If it happens in November, fine. If it happens in 2022, fine. But it's very important that people understand is that the tribes, they want sports betting, but they can wait. You know, and that's a very important thing that I don't think a lot of the industry understands. And when they do find out this, it's usually on the wrong end of it, when they're trying to push it through, and like what happened in Washington with Maverick. And, you know, those guys are just gonna, you know, we're gonna spend all this money, we're gonna team with the unions, we're gonna run right over the tribe. Then they're on the outside and they get nothing. And I think in California, the dynamics and the politics are very well entrenched. We know who's who and who's what. We know who the adversaries are. We know who the allies are. And it's gonna be a heavy lift, but it definitely can be done. And the thing to remember in California, it's going to be retail first. And when the tribes decide they want mobile, then it will happen. And if people try to push it before the tribes, we'll see how that works. We have a historical record that shows they're going to have a really, really tough time, you know, trying to get around the tribes. So I think California is the golden goose for gaming. I think we're all looking at that, and I think, as Chairman Siva said, you know, we'll find out if it's in November, and let's have our fingers crossed. That would be wonderful to get it started immediately. Doesn't mean they're going to have sports betting by Super Bowl of 2022, but you know, I've seen it happen already, so that's kind of hard to say. I think we have a question before I get too far in. Hold on, let me see. So you can just continue this. You know, Chairwoman Pinto, you know, like you said, you know, your story, especially from where I'm at, you know, I'm up the road from you, up in Temecula, and I saw your story, I saw your journey, and you know, you guys seem to get closer and closer and closer. What are you going to do with when you expand your reservation? What do that 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th acre mean for your tribe?
Well, thanks to gaming, you know, we've been able to do many things, and many opportunities have come forward for my tribal people. When we expand, unfortunately, I don't see that for another, you know, 5 years or so, but because unfortunately, some of the landowners around us have since increased their prices of land, you know, being that we are a gaming tribe. So the first thing that I want to do is get land for housing, because we only have that 6 acres, and like I said, it takes up, our gaming takes up every square inch of our property. And so the tribal members, when I see them, there's all 72 of us, you know, 40 of us are adults, and 31, 32 are minors. I hear a lot of people wanting to come back home and be that community that we've, you know, had prior to COVID and prior to gaming. But people want to come back, Victor. And what COVID has done with us too, thinking about this, is it's changed the way that we see each other. You know, we're all seeing each other via Zoom. For us, and I know a lot of American Indian people, we like to gather, we like to eat good food, we like to, you know, talk about our relatives and just catch up with each other, and that's been quite difficult. So housing will be the first thing to do. I also would like to find some land to get a urgent care center for the people down here. Currently, I'm chair of the board of Southern Indian Health Council, and we're made up of 7 consortium tribes, and we all utilize that. So that's another thing, because we're expanding, you know, tribes are growing, healthcare is important. COVID exposed a lot of weaknesses that we need to address. You know, the broadband's an issue for a lot of the tribes down here. So I want to do an urgent care, I want to do a dialysis center, a cancer center, a foster home center, all these things, and it takes land, it takes revenue. And we hope that, you know, all this money that we're generating will allow us to be able to do those things. But the housing, Victor, is the first and foremost, most important to us.
Absolutely. And you know, and if you listen to what Chairwoman Pinto is, she's really talking about one of the most important foundations of Indian country that we stand on, which is taking care of our people and taking care of our elders. And, you know, gaming would be a waste if we could not do that. So again, you know, all this revenue that we generate, it doesn't go into another big pool or another mansion. It goes into social services to operate our government, you know, and so that's very important. And, you know, my prayers out to you, Chairwoman Pinto. You know, I'm such a big fan of your work and your tribe and your people. You guys have had a long journey, and I remember when, you know, all these companies for 20 years were beating a path to your doorstep, and, you know, I watched one and another, and hey, how do I get to Hamul? Down that road, you know. But the fact that you guys did it, and you did it on such a limited basis with 6 acres to do it, and then surrounded by a community that's being adversarial and won't sell you the land, and but like, so it's been a journey, and to watch you and to continue your journey makes my heart warm, and my prayers are with you. You know, we don't have much time, but, you know, I think one of the important issues that I didn't get to, and it kind of goes into mobile, is you know, everyone's talking about mobile. This is what gaming, this is true gaming, to be able to do it on your wallet and stuff like that. But like I talked about earlier, is I talked about IGRA, and the question that I'd like to pose to the panelists right now, is there a will in Indian country to modify IGRA? You know, there's a lot of talk, there's a lot of interesting, and what that means is that, you know, maybe that would be a federal bill, maybe that would allow mobile. You know, let's start with you, Chairman Morgan. What do you think? Is there a will in Indian country to modify IGRA?
I definitely think there's interest in Indian country. unfortunately, there's a variety of topics under the IGRA legislation that need to be addressed in order for tribes to have the same equity as commercial operators. And I think that's what tribes are looking for. They want equal footing, and they don't want to be held to a different standard when we go into these ventures than commercial operators are. And so on the flip side of that, though, is always the worry that once you allow Congress to start tinkering with something, where does it end? Can there be a surgical, technical amendment to help us modernize and expand into areas that gives us that equitable treatment? I think that's something that tribal leaders need to come together and talk. And I think it's important, though, that everybody needs to understand that tribes are not monolithic, and that every jurisdiction's unique, every region's unique, and there may be different answers there. And that's part of that conversation that probably needs to occur, and to really engage tribal leadership in what makes sense for your tribe, what makes sense for your region, and how do we get there in order to make sure that tribes aren't left behind this modernization of gaming as we move to other forms of gaming and more utilizing more of the mobile element. And so I definitely think there's interest in the topic, though.
Chairman Siva, what do you think about that? Do you think there's a real need for mobile too?
I don't know if I would go so far as to say need, but I do recognize what Chairman Morgan is saying, and I do think that I think my concern would be to see if IGRA is opened up, to see that it would be opened up in a very specific way and not just kind of opened up for the legislators and Congress to kind of pick and choose and start changing some of the most important aspects of it. But I do think having a discussion where tribes can kind of weigh in on what their best needs or wants and kind of get those equitably distributed across, I think would be it's the only way to move forward, because it's not just what's best for tribes in California, it's going to be best for it's going to be for all tribes across the nation. So I do think there's interest in moving forward with some changes to IGRA. Mobile, I think, is always going to be at the forefront given the society we live in now. But yeah, I don't know. I'm hesitant about mobile, but I do think as long as we can control its entry into the market, I think tribes will be okay.
And Chairman Butler, I think with Michigan now online, I think tribes are seeing it more as an opportunity than a threat. But as because of IGRA and dealing with the states, and every state's different, and there's everyone's coming to the table and getting a different deal. Would you be willing to open up IGRA if it was under a controlled situation like Chairman Siva said? And plus we have an administration obviously that's friendly, but we have a legislature that is dysfunctional. So.
Yeah, well, I think even if it's controlled, it's still complex. And Chairman Siva and Chairman Morgan both pointed that out, in that what works in Connecticut doesn't necessarily work for California or Oklahoma or Michigan or New York. And so Michigan is fascinating when you think about, this is something that Chairman Pinto was talking about earlier, and in how it opens up the market to some of the smaller tribal operations versus the larger operations. And if you look in Michigan at the most successful tribal operator online, it's Bay Mills Indian community, right? And because they had successfully locked up one of the best operators, and it just so happens to be our partner as well in Connecticut with DraftKings, and they're dominating the market, in a market where, from a retail perspective, because of their location, they were more isolated and weren't as successful as the other gaming tribes, and so it really shifted the economics of gaming in Connecticut in Michigan for tribes. And so, does that work in Michigan? Maybe. Does it work in California? I don't know. With so many tribal nations in California, there would be significant shifts going on, and that's a difficult pill to swallow for some of the more successful tribes versus some of the smaller tribes. And if it comes down to the one or two tribes who pick the best operators and everyone else is left eating crumbs, I don't know that that's fair. And you look at that from a parity perspective. So it's a very complex question. And I go back to the point that Chairman Morgan was saying is, when you open it up, if it's not laser focused, is it Pandora's box? And what else are you going to get if you do that? And so I think there's probably, it's under this administration, at least we feel like there's some insurance that we can have a state conversation about it. And that's probably worthwhile to do that, because look, it's 30 years old, or 32 years old in that sense. And so every law should be updated and reviewed in time. It's certainly overdue for that. But as far as where we go from there, I think you let all the tribal leaders weigh in and see what works best for us collectively.
I apologize for spreading my notes. Well, you know, it's a new day. You know what I mean? I mean, 5 years ago, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. You know what I mean? So the evolution of gaming has been very important to us, because I think it's brought us along too. And like Chairman Morgan said, you know, we are not monolithic. Everyone's different. Everyone has a different approach to this. You know, I don't know our time. Are we supposed to end on the hour? I apologize.
Yes, I think we are actually past the hour. So if I can just say thank you to you, Victor, for moderating, and to our esteemed panelists. Extremely interesting discussion. This webinar has been recorded, so will be available soon. And actually will also be part of our ICE 365 Tribal Gaming content series that I talked about at the start of the webinar. So make sure that you come back. The content series launching next week on our ICE 365 website within iGamingBusiness.com. And you will have the opportunity to learn so much more on top of what you have heard today, and expanding on what you have heard today about tribal gaming and slightly different goals of tribal gaming when compared to commercial gaming. So thank you again for your participation. Thank you all, and have a great rest of the day.
Yes, thank you very much. And so I believe